couple of years, having spent over 3 decades mainly working in print at the Age and the Sunday Age. So I'd like to welcome you all and thank the Public Interest Journalism Foundation and also the Melbourne Writers Festival. A few areas of journalism I think affect people's lives more than health. The stakes are very high because usually the audience that's kind of the most interested is often unwell, vulnerable, and perhaps looking for miracle cures. They want and need quality information. Yet every waking hour what they get are ways of improving their teeth, having whiter teeth for example, fewer wrinkles, 20/20 laser enhanced vision, urge to try new and bizarre, at times diets, swallow wonder drugs, melt their fat away, deal with panic attacks and improve their stamina. And this is all urged by the media, not by anyone producing anything. It's the actual media, usually current affairs media, that is leading the charge. So there's a real disconnect between what the media presents and what the audience wants in this case. At the same time, medical reporters are bombarded by PR, manufactured so-called breakthroughs in medical research, announcements about miracle drugs, political statements about public hospital waiting lists and health funding. So today the panel will consider how the media might actually do a better job of reporting health issues. One of the questions that will arise, I hope, and I hope you ask lots of questions, is whether it is actually the media's role, whether it is actually the government's role, or the media's really to protect the public. This nanny-statism has become an issue, and an issue usually used by vested interests to try to prevent the kind of campaigns, public health campaigns that are often run. So the panellists are, I'll just introduce them briefly, is Froncesca Webb, who's the health and medicine editor at The Conversation at the end. Briony Walker, a social media expert and fanatic, she says, the co-founder of an online forum called Rural Mental Health, and seemingly dozens of other startups which are all involved with young people in mental health, and all basically aiming to connect communities with a common interest in mental health issues. And Reema Ratten on my left is also a section editor of health and medicine at The Conversation, and that's The Conversation website up on the screen. Before I just got something off my chest, before we turn to the panellists, I was intrigued to read a few weeks ago on June 19 that American Tobacco had produced a video based apparently on a John le Carre novel in response to the federal government's initiative on plain packaging. And according to the Sunday Age, and I've seen this so it's accurately reported, the video is replete with scenes of menacing Russian mobsters, exploding cars, street prostitutes and drug-addled teenagers. And the government's plain packaging move, according to British American Tobacco, would cause organised gangs, crime gangs, to flourish, encouraging syndicates and their networks to flood Australia with smuggled drugs, weapons and cigarettes. And BAT's global spokeswoman, Catherine Armstrong, who must be pretty senior to be a global spokeswoman for a company like British American Tobacco, told the Sunday Age that a lot of this video content is actually based on research done by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. And she referred the reporter to the consortium's report. Soon after, British American Tobacco's Australian boss, David Crowe, told a press conference that smuggling was driven by crime syndicates, the triads and the underbelly of the smuggling world. I was a bit intrigued by this because I actually know a bit about triads and smuggling and criminal syndicates. In fact, I was part of the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists investigation. I spent a year reporting and producing the report that they're now quoting. So I was really interested in what they I said, the International Consortium, in case you don't know, is based in Washington. It's a project of the Centre for Public Integrity. It's an invitation-only thing with 100 journalists, 45 countries, and basically the idea is that we produce reports on common issues and then put them out on the internet. So briefly, what we found, seeing how this contrasts with what British American Tobacco was actually saying, is well, not only contrast, but how grossly distorted is British American Tobacco's message by the findings. And what we found was that it was tobacco company officials, including British American Tobacco, that worked closely with both companies and individuals connected to organised crime in Hong Kong, Canada, Colombia, Italy and the United States. And I had in fact detailed how Triads, a Triad company in Hong Kong, had murdered an informer who was about to blow the lid on a $1.2 billion smuggling operation to China and Taiwan and implicate 3 former British American Tobacco executives in a $100 million Hong Kong dollars bribery scandal. So the corporate documents we unearthed, the court records, internal government reports, revealed that tobacco companies had actually orchestrated the smuggling networks, not only in Hong Kong and China, but Colombia, Canada, Southeast Asia, Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and the United States. It was part of their marketing strategy. So you get the picture. So 1 in 3 cigarettes exported worldwide is sold on the black market. Now, if you're Holden or Ford and 1/3 of your product was being sold on the black market and sort of disappearing, sorry, you just didn't light the camera. You know, you'd be asking questions, but these are questions that tobacco company never asked. So, for British American Tobacco and others, this information in the way it has, I think, is fairly scandalous, but not unexpected. So, British American Tobacco, rather than being the victim of this kind of smuggling, was actually the perpetrator of the smuggling. I had to get that up. Really annoyed me what I saw. So, I'll turn to the panelists now. Froncesca, Webb, whose role is it to inform the public about such misinformation and distortion? Government is often accused of nanny-statism when it comes to public health issues, and some sections of the media also seem to have the lack of will or lack of resources to actually provide the kind of information.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I think one of the most frustrating things that I've seen in my time as a health journalist is the way that public health information, public health interventions to make us all healthier are often dismissed as being just another paternalistic measure by government, and that sooner or later, or even now, Australia is a nanny state. Probably the most recent example of this was an op-ed in the Week in Oz by a chap named Brendan O'Neill. So he edits the Libertarian website based in London called Spikes. And he said that the war on smoking was bad for our moral and spiritual health. And she said that he'd rather live in a smoky but free world than a world where the authorities invade our lives and hardly anyone bats an eyelid. Another example, who could forget this one, is Imperial Tobacco's No Nanny State campaign. So they opted for this matron-style, not-so-nice nanny, and she told us that even though we were all old enough to make our own decisions, the government wasn't going to let us. So what this ad really wanted to do was normalise smoking. So it encouraged smokers to tell their local MP that they didn't want this plain packaging bill to go ahead, and they wanted their right to smoke protected. But of course, this isn't about protecting consumers from the government's paternalism. It isn't about Australia turning into a nanny state. Of course, it's about Imperial Tobacco and other tobacco companies continuing to make as much money as they can from selling cigarettes. And plain packaging, I guess, was the last tool they had to really market to promote these cigarettes. And you'll be pleased to know, if you haven't heard already, that manufacturers, junk food manufacturers, alcohol companies. So I guess if you consider how much power these companies have over us, how much advertising budgets they have, it really makes sense to want to counter that power with public health messages from experts, from government, and I guess that's where the media plays a really important role. Everyone knows the harms of cigarettes, but we really know a lot less about the harms of seeing an ad for delicious chocolate biscuits, going out and eating those chocolate biscuits, maybe doing a little bit less exercise than we should do, that leading to overweight, to obesity, and the raft of health issues that really come with that. I think in that sense we can really see the obesity epidemic as a result of the junk food industry's profound success. So we've seen that the government and public health experts have had a win this week on Wednesday with the plain packaging bill passing. I'm really interested to hear whether you guys think this can happen in other areas as well. So we might hold off on that conversation for now, but hopefully you can have a think about that and we can chat about it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Briony Walker, we've seen an absolute explosion in the use of social media, and we've seen the mainstream media absolutely struggling in terms of how do they monetize this, how do they perhaps try to connect with an audience better than they have in the past, and I think they're still grappling with those issues. But you seem to have hit a model that actually connects very much at a grassroots level with people who need to talk to each other. Can you tell us a bit about that?
I suppose the first question I want to ask everybody is who's on social media? So Facebook, Twitter, nearly everybody? Who's on Twitter? Good, okay. Basically, I think one of the things that kind of really bugs me when you talk to a lot of people about particularly Twitter is that it's just seen as this tool for people talking about themselves, and it's this kind of self-absorbed, this is what I had for breakfast. That's not the case. That's not the case at all. Might be the case for some people actually. As a general rule, it's actually a really amazing tool for connecting communities, across not just say Australia but internationally as well. One of the things that I'm quite passionate about and that I really enjoy and have been involved in setting up something called tweet chats. I don't know if anybody's taken part in them, but effectively it just involves setting up a pre-arranged time based on a hashtag that makes sense to anybody discussing a specific issue. So I run a rural mental health tweet chat which takes place every second Wednesday at 7:30, and we discuss different issues. So I think one of the key reasons that I set this up with 3 colleagues who are just really passionate about the issue of the mental health of rural Australians, is that they don't see their concerns, their issues, the things that worry them, potential solutions within traditional media. It's not addressed, it's not particularly helpful. What they see within traditional media is a lot of politicking, is a lot of discussion about big campaigns or scare tactics about schizophrenics, murdering people, things like that. They don't actually see solutions, discussions, how this actually impacts people, and particularly for young people in rural areas, particularly young gay people in rural areas, particularly Indigenous youth in rural areas, farmers in rural areas. They just don't see on any level within the media anything that's particularly helpful. So what I think is fantastic about having these online discussions, numerous discussions. I take part in an international one that takes place on Wednesday as well, called MHSM, Mental Health Social Media, is that it's a really great way for people to connect with one another, to potentially share stories, share their concerns, develop, work together to develop solutions. And I think the main thing is to be informed, to be heard, to connect, and hopefully for solutions to come out of it. But I think a lot of it really is about connection. some journalists take part in these kind of areas, and I think that's fantastic. I do think there are a lot of really amazing health journalists out there who do a great job. I just think that the problem for them is the nature of traditional media and this kind of black and white approach. It's this or it's that. Life is far more complex, challenging and difficult than that. And I think that one of the issues, for example, that we really wanted to talk about as part of the rural mental health chat was the ban on live export, because obviously there was a huge public outcry, but it has a hugely damaging impact on farmers. It has a huge impact on their mental health, and they very much felt demonised by a lot of the public discussion that was taking place. So that's something that we wanted to address and discuss, because it's not this or that, it is incredibly complex. So I think that's one of the key issues that I think social media really resolves. The other thing I think as well is that politicians are beginning to take notice. We've already had politicians take part in the rural mental health chat. We have the Minister of Mental Health take part in a chat primarily that hopefully to listen and to answer questions. So they're getting it. I think the issue for traditional media and their approach is that we all know that traditional media is dying. I've heard people say the age has only got 5 years left in it. Young people, I talk to young people all the time about media use. They don't read newspapers, they don't watch the nightly news, they spend all their time on I ask them what websites they visit and they say Facebook and YouTube, that's it. This is the way of the future. I think if traditional media wants to influence or wants to actually engage that community, they have to take part. But the thing about social media is it's a dialogue, it's a conversation, and I think traditional media have to participate in that conversation, and I think that will prove to be a challenge and a changing model. But I think that, not-for-profits particularly, but a lot of organisations are already doing that. I think that's kind of everything I wanted to say.
Okay, I think there'll be quite a few questions about the kind of conversations you actually have on Wednesday night, every second Wednesday night. I mean, I'd be curious as to what actually takes place there. So when I was health editor at the Age, I mean, we were just bombed. There was a snowstorm of releases, faxes, and not so much. A fair while ago, so not so much use of technology, but a lot of stories about researchers, one breakthrough after another, and when you read them at face value, they look like they're going to change the world. You ask a few more questions and issues arise. So Reema, Ratten, I think, talk about both the pressures facing researchers in public health, but also how does the media actually know when a breakthrough is a breakthrough rather than something else?
I'm going to talk about those things. Something happened this week that really, and I'm going to tell you a story about it in a minute, but I think health is a really difficult subject area to cover. It's very vast. You have research that promises things, and you look into it, and it's a study of 25 people, with a lot of confounding variables, and you slowly start to understand this language they're speaking, that researchers speaking, that is a priesthood. If you don't speak the language, you're not going to get it. It sounds amazing, but it's actually a small step forward. So I think, to address the first question posed by the title of this session, I think, how does the media cover the issue that matters most? I would say if they're doing it honestly, the answer is with great difficulty. It is a difficult thing to cover, and the difficulty doesn't end with the diversity and the complexity of the research itself. I think that's really the starting point. I think, like any arena where there's a lot of money to be made, to be spent, a lot of emotion to be manipulated to that end, there's going to be a proliferation of best interests at work, and that's certainly true in public health. And a lot of these are quite well disguised. It's hard to see. So I want to tell you a story now about this. Now, if you don't know about the conversation, which is where Fron and I are from, we publish stories by researchers based on the news cycle or about their research. So you will know that for this story. A few weeks ago, an alcohol researcher did a study, quite a long study. He published it, and his findings were that this organisation that was industry was preventing effective regulation of alcohol products. Because what it would do is recommend certain things that were known to not work. So certain measures that were known to not work, researchers in the field knew they didn't work. They would recommend these measures to government as a way to regulate the industry. And it worked really well because this group is very well respected by government. It's quite influential. And when he published this, there was obviously a little bit of a flurry, and he started to give some media interviews. And he wrote a story for me. And then I got a very concerned phone call saying I can't publish the story. He has been receiving very threatening emails from this organisation saying they're going to sue him. He's defamed them and all these things, even though it was quite a credible study, very good, it was good research. So I haven't published the story, which is it is a sad loss. Partly because he's expecting a baby, and he doesn't want to start a fight right now. Partly because even this is going to fail any sort of court action. Even if it were to fail, the amount of legal fees he would rack up as an individual would be, it's destroying. So we haven't published it. So I think I just wanted to tell that story because I think it's an important one, and I think it's because there's a lot of silencing going on in the back area that the media doesn't even get onto in public health. So that's one layer of difficulty. The other, I think, is inherent in this other story I'm going to tell you, and it is the story of a woman who gave a public lecture. It was scheduled to be given on Tuesday night in Sydney about raising babies. She looked at all the evidence on how best to raise babies. She was going to present it to a public lecture that a lot of parents attended, she said. So in the run-up to the lecture, she gave an interview to the Sunday Telegraph, who then proceeded to take one thing completely out of context and wrote an article that says it's child abuse to have prams that face outwards. And this resulted in massive, she received heaps of hate mail. Someone went as far as to write a brochure, print it out, and stick it on all the cars in the car park she uses at work at UTS. And she's getting a lot of abuse. And this story was supposed to come in, and I called her up, and she was pretty much close to tears. She's, I'm getting all this harassment, they've mistaken me, I just said, maybe I use sort of unwise language, but I think, this is about raising babies. Why are these people, she couldn't even begin to express her angst about it. So I got her to write it down, and I guess that's one of the roles of new media, that sort of holding traditional media to account. And that's one of the things certainly that motivates us, and it certainly motivated our founders who come from traditional media, who've seen it. I guess they feel the standards have deteriorated quite a lot. And so, I was pretty pleased that I could publish this. She was pretty pleased to have a platform to clear the air. And I think that's the sort of opportunity that new media. Sorry, did I say social media earlier? Sense. But I think this is only the starting point. I agree with Briony that this is sort of a revolution in brewing. Things like citizen journalism, crowdsourcing, the great transparency that visual agenda, that sort of engagement by the public will engender are all positive things. So community engagement is vital. So it's all happening, I think, slowly but surely, and I think we can expect it to change. We do have a whole new world of health reporting coming, I think. So let's hope, all those voices, we'll see some harmony, not just often able to think as well. But that's my stories for the week. It's been many upset people, and because of the same sort of public health media issue.
Okay, thank you. I've certainly got some questions, but I just thought to open it up and see whether anyone in the audience wanted to ask anything at this stage. No questions? Yes?
How is it maintained? If anyone can just quote something or give their opinion, how can you monitor if someone is abusive or try and intimidate other people?
Yeah, It's a little bit different in Twitter because it's based on hashtags, so it's kind of less about it going to a place. But I work with a lot of, I have worked in mental health organisations managing social media profiles. So I think a big part is ensuring that you have really, really strong risk management protocols and policies. So one of the things that I'm working with a mental health organisation at the moment is ensuring that you have just moderation guidelines, so that we remove content based on this, and this. But I think you've got to be, the really important thing is you've got to be really transparent with your community. I think that's really important. I think that if you delete content, you need to let them know why you're deleting it. The funny thing is, in my experience working with particularly youth mental health organisations, is things like abuse or concerning content, for example, young people referencing wanting to suicide or such, is uncommon. It's obviously something that you need to be concerned about, and the other thing you need to obviously be concerned about is protecting privacy, encouraging young people or anybody to think really clearly about how much of themselves they want to share. When you're encouraging a discussion about mental health, we have to remind people to really think about how much they really want to share their own personal stories, and just remind them of the potential impact of that. And to give you an example, we had quite a small chat on Wednesday about rural youth. 38 participants, but through the nature of social media and being retweeted, it went out to 10,000 people. So it's kind of bearing that in mind and providing that guidance. So I think whatever you do, when we set up rural health, for example, we put in a lot of reminders on our blog, and we try as much as possible within the Twitter chat to remind people. But I think you need to have really clear processes in place and make that clear to the community. If there's one thing that frustrates me more than anything else, it's more corporates will just delete content because someone says something they don't like, and I don't think that that is respectful to the community, and I don't think that it benefits the organisation. I think that it's about engagement and taking on board feedback and talking, not just almost censoring.
Yes.
Yes. Sorry, I forgot.
Reema.
These examples you've cited, especially the last one, are you saying that the newspaper did this on purpose with this interview, that they undermined this person who wanted a genuine, platform to give her interview from?
Look, I think it's the approach of the newspaper. It's the approach of the newspaper.
Yes.
A journalist is always looking for an angle that's going to get readers. And I spoke to the head of the media office at this university, and he said he called up the journalist and said, what have you done? It doesn't make sense. This was about something completely different. And she said, look, my approach is fine. It gets lots of people reading, and that's not controversy for the sake of it to attract attention, I think, and that's it works.
And I suppose just to add to that, I worked in media relations as a PR person for 10 years, and I would sit there with a product or whatever it may be, research, or and I would basically sit there thinking, where's the controversy, and basically pull something out, because I know that if I provided something factual and relevant and up to date, that wouldn't get any coverage. So you basically hunt for the kind of where's the hook, where's the angle. And it's a silly example, but I worked for Lonely Planet for 6 years, and I would get enormous amounts of media coverage about guidebooks, fundamentally quite boring and practical things that you take on your journey and tells you a good place to stay, by basically pulling out and saying Lonely Planet says this city's better than that city, and that would get enormous amounts of coverage. And it's just the nature, I think, of I think that's how, as a media relations professional, you had to work. You had to find a controversy, otherwise media didn't seem to care.
That's not really responsible journalism, is it?
No. People read it. I think that's the interesting thing. Is I think what a journalist would say is providing, factual, helpful information doesn't sell newspapers. And And I think your current affair and Station 9 are prime examples of that.
A lot of the textbook definitions of news, conflict has to be there.
Yeah.
That's what the experts are saying. Just over here and then.
I've got a question. I represent kind of mainstream traditional media. I make documentaries about science and health and medical, and the average film gets about 20 million audience over a period of 12 months. It takes me on average 5 to 10 years to raise the finance. They're usually $1 million budgets. I have to find the angle.
Yep.
Catching cancer with Ian Fraser, I got death threats. I got pictures of myself being garroted in my mailbox. I had hate mail for 2 years. My point being that when we just, I'm curious about how we can all work together in different ways. Like, I take on the big subjects that take me years. I just spent $40,000 of my own money developing a series that will go to air next year on vaccination, trying to deal with journalism, right?
Yes.
Now, that's $40,000 of my own money that I will not get back in 6 months of my life in order to make a film happen. Now, I'm just trying to go to the traditional media and saying dismissing what people are doing is a tad unfair. Because there are some of us that fight to the death to tell the stories that we want to tell. And I've made 45 films now, so I'm not a beginner. I know how to do this, and I do it on the world stage. And so my point is, how do we, I'm here today because I want to find out more ways of actually trying to connect in so that we all talk more. I'm on Twitter, I could go join your chat. I mean, how do we get this sensibility about, science is changing the world we live in. And health and medical research is vitally important. It's going to, the world in 10 years' time is going to be totally different. How do we prepare ourselves? How do we deal with the fact that people are terrified? How do we deal with the fact of fear? Horizon did a show with Manasana at SBS the other night about fear and horizon, but we need to do more and more and more. And I'm not satisfied with one film that goes out and does the world circuit. And okay, 20 million, 25 million, and one film, 60 million people saw it in a single night. But then what happens? Where does the debate go? How do we maintain it? You guys are stuff that stays there and keeps moving, and I guess that's a big question.
And that's the thing, I would never want to demonise what, there are some amazing journalists out there who do really important, particularly investigative work. And there are a lot of journalists who also tap into social media, and I by no means would want to, I actually think the issue is more with their editors.
Of course. But my point is you can fight.
Yes.
And you can find a voice, and you find a way to get the stories out where you want them to, and if you do it well, you play with that idea of the controversy, but you don't undermine the research, or you deliver what's actually valuable information to people. But still sell it, because for me it's telly, so you still got to sell it. But making sure that underneath the science is solid as a rock, at least for however long you can have science solid as a rock, because it will move. But I guess I'm just really keen to keep that idea that there are people trying to do something else.
Yeah, and I think the way that I would see it is just developing a key social media strategy to connect, think about who you want to talk to, and then developing avenues with which to do that. So Facebook's an easy one. 80% of the Australian population is on Facebook. Twitter's a little bit smaller. You get your basically key influencers and people hook into their specific topic interests. So that's where you get people who are highly engaged. So I think that in an ideal world, when you do launch a documentary, you work with new media, you work with social media, and hopefully keep that conversation going, and hopefully almost have it loop back into any supporting website or blog or what you have, and maintain that conversation.
How does it work on YouTube as a venue?
I think YouTube is interesting because the thing that's really interesting about YouTube is that you don't necessarily have to have these huge production budgets or anything. If anything, that's a bit of a turn off to consumers. People actually like homemade videos. You just need really good sound quality. I think it's a really great way of creating connection. But I would encourage everybody to do this actually. Because I've created lots of YouTube videos, is thinking about my attention span. Because you're asking a lot of people on YouTube to take some time out of their day. I get bored after about 15 seconds. So it's really important to create content that is really highly targeted, that is really engaging, and humour is normally the way to do it. And that's, I mean, I'm sure you'd all agree, the kind of YouTube videos that we've probably all seen and been sent on tend to be the funny ones. And that's a real challenge within the health field. How on earth do you do that? And once it's out there as well. So yeah, YouTube's a really funny one. It's, I mean, obviously it's incredibly powerful, but it's hard to do right.
I think part of the answer, really, if there is an answer, I'm not sure that there is one single answer, is collaborations. And if you look at what's happening in the States between papers, serious papers, 3 or 4 years ago, they would never run serious journalism produced by someone outside. Now they do it routinely. I was in Washington, and the Post had the story behind, the man behind Mumbai, for example, and the byline was from Joe Blogg's ProPublica, a non-profit philanthropic organisation. 3 or 4 years ago, that never would have happened. So, you're looking at collaborations between mainstream media, non-profit centres and community groups and social media. It has to be part of that. And also in defence of mainstream media and The Age, and where I spend most of my time, is, the story that Reema talked about being intimidated legally, that wouldn't happen at The Age. You'd be intimidated and you'd simply do what journalists do. You quote them. You simply quote them. And I've done that. The lawyer said, you write this article and I'll sue you. Goes up, just quote them. And you can do that on The Age. But you know what? So the serious, hardcore investigations, I think, at least in Australia, that the mainstream media has a huge role, including documentary makers, has a huge role. And in a way, social media can't be expected to do the verification. When I was a night editor on The Age, I would spend half my night talking to lawyers, legal stories, and you try to do that as an individual, you're going to rack up bills that are, too extravagant, really. So, yeah. I'll come to you,
My question was more back to your discussion of credibility, I guess. They say we get the media we deserve, and every night I look at the news or read the paper. I think, this is.
I don't deserve this.
So I'm wondering, I know that news, mainstream media is about selling advertising and selling media, whereas social media is not so much about selling as the communication. Do you think that we're going to see a real shift in the type of, or have we already seen a real shift in the type of reporting, if you like, on social media versus our mainstream media?
Yeah, one of the things we do, I guess we're a new type of media company, that we're a not-for-profit organisation. We're funded by the research sector, and one of our strengths is that we get stories written by academics. It's also one of our weaknesses because they are open to intimidation, as we just spoke about. So I guess the idea was to get an expert in the field to write about it, to write about the subject area, and that way, and to write in a way that's easily communicated to a lay audience. That's a big challenge. Yeah, that's a challenge for us editors. It's often a lot of translation, but and I think there's a growth in niche media type companies, and we're sort of one in Australia. I don't know if there are many others.
No, not really. I mean, I'm kind of interested in the cultural differences between the States and Australia, and it's kind of what I'm investigating, where people, will, philanthropists and mums and dads will put in $20, $30 to a non-profit doing investigative or serious journalism. Here you give it to a cancer centre, that's fine, to a fire relief fund, that's fine, but people don't see it in terms of donating money. Journalism isn't seen as a charity case in Australia the way it is in the United States. And I think over there it's more, they see me as being a pillar of democracy, holding the powerful to account. And they've got all these values there, which I kind of think are here, but I haven't seen any evidence of it yet.
Yeah, that sort of fourth estate idea I think is fantastic, and that's what we want. that's what everyone here probably wants, but it's expensive. And another thing I think about the sort of new media, and I think the Croaky blog coordinator, Melissa Sweet, has quite a lot of information about this. Is new funding models. I think New News does that quite a lot. So they have a specific story that they're going to look into, an investigation, and they ask for donations from the public to fund that exact story. And I think that's a new kind of innovative way of ensuring that it's effective journalism, and that, it's not just something you're doing to deadline.
It hasn't worked.
Yeah, well, it's only just started.
Well, it's been going for a little while. It's based on Spot Us, if you're interested. Where it originated in the US was a thing called Spot Us by a guy called Cohn. And they kicked off with a grant from, I think, the Knight Foundation of a couple of $100,000, and they're off and running. But the Public Interest Journalism Foundation hasn't got that kind of. And so far there have been about 2 stories pitched and funded and produced. And look, it's a great idea, but so far it's hasn't really taken off. Yeah, well, yeah.
Just knowing how difficult it is to try and sell in a story to a journalist, a good news health story, without, if it hasn't got scandal or controversy or, around it, it's not going to go anywhere. Is the media we deserve driven by the journalists or driven by sales in the end?
Or is it consumers?
I think, one of the things that we haven't really talked too much about today is the power of the PR machines, and the way that, I get maybe 100 media releases come across my desk each day. So for us as gatekeepers, we've got to be really careful and drill down into, the real issue. So if it's a research paper, is this just the first phase of research that might generate something in maybe 10 years or 20 years, or is it something that we should take note of? Or even if it is going to be something really spectacular in 20 years, do we still report on it? So there are so many issues we've got to try to measure up in that 5 seconds that we look through a press release and work out whether it deserves our attention. And I think the point you made before about the health and medicine journals and community working together, I think that one thing that we can do really well, especially using things like Twitter, is tell other journalists that this is something to take note of. And we're not just listening to the PR people and the media releases. We're actually getting tweets from all over the place. A lot of scientists are on Twitter now, and they're tweeting about their research. So it's not just coming through the traditional channels of the press release or the journals. It's actually coming from the scientists themselves, which for Reema and I, it's really exciting to work where we can follow up on those things.
And more scientists run their own blogs, which is really interesting, especially the ones who work in controversial areas. More and more are kind of finding it's really easy to just put their words out there, and that's a positive step, I think. But we'll publish your happy stories about it. Thanks to us.
I was going to say, the funny thing is often some of the best stories about human experience and managing kind of mental health issues and things like that are often women's magazines, dare I suggest it, which aren't perceived to be highly credible, but I think that's actually quite interesting because those magazines are very much focused on storytelling and things like that, but that's the kind of, I used to work with an organisation as part of, I don't know if anybody's heard of Mindframe. Mindframe provide guidance to the media about how to report on suicide and mental illness. Effectively, the way, particularly suicide, but also mental illness is reported actually can have quite a profound impact. There's been a fair bit of research. Effectively, the more detail you provide, the more prominent, the more sensational, the more likely it is that there will be follow-up copycat suicide. So Mindframe is a fantastic resource for journalists. And what they've found is that the more that you talk about issues to do with recovery, family support, that kind of stuff. That's the positive. A big headline about suicide and how they did it. And as an example, I think there was a study in, I think it was Germany, that there was a specific report about a young man who suicided at a specific, I think he threw himself onto railway tracks, and within, I think, a week there were 3 suicides in Transport. So the best kind of reporting about suicide and mental illness is stories about people who survived mental illness, is about the impact that it's had on their families. It's about recovery, those kind of things. That's what I would like to see, but that's not something that you often see in newspapers, but you do see it often sometimes on television and often in movies and things. Sorry, that's a
Reema?
I just wanted to ask a bit more about the sharing of stories, because what we're seeing, of course, are that people generally, the public, have to share stories. But how do you then involve, and do you want to involve, the so-called experts? So, Briony, for example, in your chat, how do you deal with kind of patients versus doctors?
Yep.
How do you engage the doctors in this debate, or other experts that could really enhance the discussion?
We invite them. We strongly encourage them to participate and to listen. Some organisations participate and listen, and that's what we ask them to do. But I have constantly been in contact with the AMA, and they won't take part.
Why? So I'm interested in this. Because it seems like there's this other side missing.
Yes.
To me, like it's, we can
But the
talk,
funny
but
thing is, smaller health organisations do. So we had some really fantastic ones on Wednesday night when we were talking about youth. The bigger ones don't. And I think that a lot of it is probably fear, that they're worried. I don't think they quite get social media, and I think they're worried that what will happen if I talk to people. And I think that there's a lot of education that still has to take place. I think that there's been some interesting studies about that my colleague undertook about I think GPs and social media are very, very conservative, incredibly conservative, and understandably so, because their approach is very, and also psychiatrists and psychologists, because their approach is very much about keeping boundaries.
But I think that's changing though. I mean, we, I guess, provide the other perspective, so we hear directly from the experts.
Yeah.
And I find that we do get a lot of, health consumers, the general public, actually reading these articles and then commenting at the end, and they actually get to engage with these experts. So we published a great piece last week on sibling risk, and we had a couple of readers come back and say, look, I'm really pleased that you're talking about these, historical issues about, family guilt and refrigerated parenting, because I have a personal experience with this. And then we had some other commenters say, look, we're hearing so many new things about autism every day. We don't know what to believe. And then the author, the expert, as psychologists in this instance, can then kind of go back and engage with those consumers. So it's something that we're trying to get going. We're trying to get the conversation started.
Yeah.
But it's a pretty steep learning curve for these experts.
Very much so. Very much so. I come from a reporting background, ABC reporting background, so I've seen how you get put these people put up to report on the information. It's just, and you've got to file that story by the hour. So that's all you get, and that organisation controls the information. So whether it's the Cancer Council or some other medical organisation, they've put the information and spun the story, and you've got that to work with, and you've got to get it out, and that's what happens. Now I'm working in a hospital sector and putting stories back the other way, which has been interesting. And now I've realised how a lot of these stories that, say, for example, a hospital might want to put out are tied to funding. So they want their research in a big, well-recognised venue on a major traditional media. So that's that particular research that
they're seeking that for that reason. But then they want to promote and engage with the community, so they want to promote for a different reason in a different venue. So there are many different sort of avenues for medical stories at different levels of intellect or different levels of investigation. So it's not just the one story, it's all types. So for example, something like this, say you wouldn't get the coverage perhaps for funding purposes, but you would get it for another audience. So it becomes people like, I suppose, me, and trying to work out who's going to do what and who's friendly to this and what happened to that, because they'll try and unpick that story. Like, for example, yes, your example, very familiar, and watch out for that sort of area, because they'll unpick and they'll dig away and they'll get something out that you won't have thought of. So there's this kind of middle area where the stories are floating and seems to have, people have ownership, but I don't know where the control lies.
Isn't that when you know I'm peer review service? I used to run Catalyst and the faction of the NBC, and I made a point of saying to the Catalyst guys that you have to have an expert consultant who is not in your story on every story. And you can imagine the level of time, extra time that required. So if you're doing a show with Ian Fraser, you've got to get someone who's Ian Fraser's equivalent to judge whether or not this story on Ian Fraser is fair. And you know, you go around in circles, and for fast turnaround, that's almost impossible. But it's almost like we need to have some journalistic checking mechanism, like Mindframe do for mental health. That's fantastic. I made Angels and Demons with Andrew Denton,
which was great.
And it was so amazing having those resources to tap into. I'm not quite sure I should handle that one.
Yeah.
And we're about to talk about this. What do you suggest? And we had a self-harm sequence that was the most extraordinary design. And we didn't put it to air.
Yes.
Because we were told we were going to get so many copycats.
Yes.
And yet it was one of the most beautiful pieces of telly I've ever seen, and Andrew just handled it so beautifully. It was just made you weep, you know? But we got advice. So how do we get advice as journalists from other journalists or something?
That mind frame.
Mindframe, yeah.
So Mindframe will do it in that area.
Yes.
But I almost feel like we need to have some review process for ourselves when we go, I've got this story, my script is at this point, or my piece is at this point. I'd love to have 5 really good journalistic heads on this. You know, I've been in a position where I've had scientists deliberately mislead me with best intentions. You know, they've got a message out and they think it's fine. I made a film about bovine spongiform encephalopathy, a mad cow disease, with a scientist who said it will never ever transmit to humans. This is 1995. Hello, wrong. So the scientists can get it wrong. The scientists can mislead you. They can be doing PR. And when you're green and starting up, how do you know? You know, you get a sixth sense for this stuff once you've been doing it for 20 years. But how do we find other like people who will honestly give feedback and input without it being a threat to your story's going to run away over there or something? I don't know. Is that
community for
But I do think that it is, that's part of it. Because the thing that I love about particularly Twitter is that it's a space, and if you're not on it, one of the things that's kind of important to bear in mind if you're thinking about it is it's a really wonderfully open space. It's one of the few spaces where if you ask questions, you actually, that's almost a positive. You're never criticised for getting something wrong. I think, I remember when I first set up my Twitter thinking I'm going to say something terrible or people are going to think I'm an idiot. And that's not true. I think people are really happy to help. And if you actually ask questions, you tend to get a better response than just offering opinion often. It's just a wonderful networking community where people rally around specific issues. And I think that that's something that journalists should think about, is talking, amongst themselves about these issues. So I'd love to see more of that.
But you can't imagine a tweet going, Professor so-and-so said X. Does anybody know if that's right?
I actually think it's, this is idealistic, but it is a journalist's job to weigh up that information and verify that information.
And not for that, we've got lots of time.
That is what journalism is about, finding the truth.
And maybe journalists actually need to be less guarded. I think sometimes I get a sense of, particularly, I've done media relations in the UK and in Australia, and I find that Australian journalists are a lot more kind of protective about, don't tell me what to do and I'm going to do my own thing and this is, you know, I'm a journalist. Whereas I think in the UK they tend to be a little bit more flexible, and maybe by being a little bit more open and willing.
Transparent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There's one more question. I think we're running out
Sorry,
of
I just
time.
wanted to ask about engaging an older audience via social media. It seems to be very difficult to do.
Yeah, engaging all the
No, it depends. The biggest online growth for Facebook is older people. I think that it's about, I think they're just a little bit behind and it will continue happening. But really, as with anything, it's just about tapping into what interests them and engaging them on that level. So I think that, I don't even want to think about Twitter. I don't know, it's kind of a funny one because I think with Twitter, for example, with rural mental health, we have young people, but then I've got 60-year-old farmers who are participating as well. So I think it really depends. But I think the key, as with anything to do with communications, is just kind of tapping in, providing support, resources, advice, guidance. If older people are wary about how to use social media, it's about providing them support in how to do that. Just as when I work with youth organisations, one of the key things we do is consistently send out messages about safe social networking. Perhaps something that I need to consider is, okay, how do I put out messages about how to, use tools? But they're embracing it. They're embracing it very much so. I just think they're probably a little bit behind. I know people who are still on MySpace.
What's your experience?
I work with the Cancer Council at the moment, but I've been a journalist in the past as well.
Yeah. But what led you to ask that question? I mean,
I'm working in one of my areas that I'm working in is bowel cancer, and obviously that affects 50 plus, so that's the audience I really want to get in touch with. And we've been using Facebook ads and different things to try and engage people online, but it just hasn't been working very well. So
okay. So okay, I think that's about it time-wise. I'd like to thank you for your questions and participation, and thank the panellists, and hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.